You can see my name's Richard Irving. Just to give a little bit of context and also to apologise in advance, I've got rather a lot of slides, so I will be sort of diving to and from the computer. My background, I did an MSc about 10 years ago at Birkbeck. That was also on supporter ownership. I've now come back. I'm just beginning my third year, so literature review is almost complete. Just beginning to formulate some research questions, and I'm quite keen to sort of get some feedback from you guys really on a number of issues that I'm wrestling with right at this moment. A lot of the information that you'll see here today will be quite familiar to a number of you, since we are obviously sat within a football ground that is a club that's supporter owned. I'm just going to give you a little bit of introduction and background, a bit of history of supporters trusts and fan ownership, comparison in German football, some comparisons with what I see similar problems within the cooperative and mutual movement, a bit about my sort of theories and the research I'm going to do, and then some of the questions that I'm wrestling with, as I say, which is about defining success and the way forward for the supporter ownership movement. So just to give you also a little bit of context with myself and the reason that I'm interested in studying supporter ownership and supporters trust is that I actually was a founding board member of the Arsenal Supporters Trust, which I think was back in 2003. And then subsequently I was co-opted onto the board of my other club. I'm lucky to have two football teams, which is Lewes FC, who are now actually community owned and have been for the last 6 years. So there's kind of my background and my interest in the whole issue of supporter ownership. The whole history of the movement comes with, as it says here, just under half of the current Premier League and Football League clubs having entered administration since 1990, including 5 current Premier League members. Highest profile has probably been Portsmouth, with its rather disastrous fall from FA Cup winners in 2008 to several administrations and finally going into supporters trust ownership. We have obviously seen the administration of clubs reaching a peak in 2002. There are a number of reasons for this, and I'll allude to some of those a little later, as I'm sure you're probably aware. They've obviously now slowed, but there are increasingly, as we all know, problems, and I list 4 clubs there, but many of you will know plenty of other examples that private ownership and some of the owners that we are blessed with in football are not exactly great for the future of the game. Supporter ownership, the trust history, first trust set up in 1992 at Northampton Town. They obviously went into administration at that point. The success of the supporters trust there really, I think, was directly resultant in the government the Labour government forming Supporters Direct to oversee the fan ownership and the development of supporters trusts. Simply because the majority of fan-owned clubs were coming about as a result of clubs going into administration. There were obviously alternatives to that, one of them being this club here, obviously, and probably the most successful example, and that is AFC Wimbledon. The actual fan ownership within the Football League, it's not really penetrated as far as perhaps Supporters Direct would have liked it to have done back in 2000. There are 5 Football League clubs now actually under fan ownership, 42 throughout the non-league pyramid. Only 1 Premier League club, Swansea City, has any form of supporter representation on the board, and the Supporters Society there owns 21.1%. I'm going to come back to that as well, because as you'll see with my critique of the movement as it stands at the moment, even they are suffering some problems. And one of the key issues that supporter-owned clubs do face is the pressure from the commercialisation of the game, let's say, which has led to clubs to varying degrees of success, such as Brentford, Notts County and Northampton Town actually returning back into private ownership. I'll skip over this tiny bit, but my thought is that to get good case studies, obviously AFC Wimbledon and FC United really do provide me with some excellent material to study. But my key interest is actually the problems that the movement is actually facing. Here at FC United, for example, there's been resignations from the board, some discussions about whether the club is truly democratic. We've had other examples of other clubs that have been, to all intents and purposes, well received as supporter-owned, like AFC Telford United, but they announced last month that the trust is going to relinquish control of the club. We've had other issues. Supporters Direct become involved in a pretty nasty public dispute concerning one of its long-term employees, and this is jeopardising potentially the future funding of Supporters Direct itself. And even my club at the last AGM a month or so ago, they had to announce to their fans, and bear in mind this is an 8th tier club with average crowds of sort of 400 or 500, that they're actually losing, or have lost in the past year, £95,000. And this is being met by by some of the directors, which goes against the whole sort of ethos of the supporter-owned idea. Looking back at Swansea City, for example, as well, this was, I should have put a date on that, but this was just a couple of years ago that Hugh Hughes, the supporter director at Swansea City, really eulogising about the model that they have, and that they've proved that supporter involvement can work. And of course, just in the past year or so, despite owning 21.1% of the Premier League club, they've had a lot of tension there because of, in July, the club was taken over without consultation with the trust board or the supporter director, and also no consultation when they changed the team manager as well. So these are sort of examples that of the pressures that the whole movement is facing. And again, I think this kind of explains. I don't know how many of you obviously are too familiar with German football and its unique 50+1 ownership model, whereby no one owner can actually own any more than 49% of a club. But there are a lot of pressures again from the commercialisation of the game there. They effectively are saying, or the club owners are saying, that they're unable to compete with the Premier League. What they're saying is we're not earning as much money, although that didn't stop the two top German teams getting to the Champions League final in 2013, and that's something that English clubs haven't done for a while, obviously. Those sort of pressures have been resisted by the DFB so far, but it's quite clear that the investment that is coming in from wealthy external sponsors, and this includes Bayern München, for example, as well, and now the top team in Germany right at the moment, which is bankrolled by Red Bull, RB Leipzig. The whole landscape is beginning to change, and perhaps this ownership model, as in the supporter-owned model in the UK, is coming under pressure. As I said at the start, I can see echoes within what's happened in the cooperative and mutual movement in the past 25 to 30 years or so. Those building societies that demutualised were eventually taken over by the banks, and now they no longer exist. I believe that has some echoes with the reversion of formerly trust-owned and supporter-owned clubs back into private ownership, and this is where I'm wrestling with some of the data that I have right at the moment, with trying to correlate the various pressures that they're all facing, the various different strands of that I'm examining. As I say here, again, the cooperative bank chairman, you may well remember, was involved in a scandal a number of years ago, and this led to a fairly gleeful press trying to jump on the fact that the cooperatives, effectively what they were saying, I believe, was that this really doesn't work, and that they actually don't want it to work. And we've even had, just in the past week, the government who said not so long ago that they would be very interested in getting worker ownership as a part, and workers onto the boards of major corporations. It's kind of been a U-turn just in the past week or so, and these are, as I say, these are just strands that I'm trying to pull together that I think all amount to the same thing. Okay. I won't go too much more into the theory and research. Then, as you can see, I've looked at stakeholder theory, democratic theory, theories around exit, voice and loyalty, which seem to obviously apply to football. I'm going to be interviewing people from a number of walks of the football world, if you like. And these are some of the criticisms also that not only the theories face, but also I can see a resonance within the criticisms that the supporter-owned world actually faces as well. So the pressures of commercialisation, etc., as I say, those are things that I believe we share with all those other bodies that I've mentioned before. But one of my major issues is that I'm trying to establish whether this is actually the way forward for football support, but then what is actually, how do I define the success of the supporter ownership movement? Is it about promotion and winning trophies? Is it about how many people you're involved in the community? Or is it about, and which I probably believe right at this moment, is it the sustainability? And that, I think, is probably Supporters Direct's view on things. I'll skip over this part, which is just slightly out of date. It's a month or so out of date because it shows that 3 of the 5 supporter-owned clubs are actually in the bottom 4 of the Football League right at the moment, or it did at the end of October. So just the questions I'm going to be looking at asking, are mutually owned clubs only going to succeed in non-league football? Will they only ever be formed out of adversity? Why have they not been able to penetrate the higher levels of the game? And really, can only clubs that are privately owned actually succeed? What, as I alluded to all the way through this presentation, what are the similarities that the movement is facing in comparison to the mutuals and cooperatives? And then the things that are likely, or that could impact on supporter ownership in the future. If football's more stringently regulated, will the administration cease and that eliminate the need for trusts and fan-owned clubs? And a kind of critique of Supporters Direct as well, whether they've really fulfilled their objectives and their mandate. And as I say at the end, what really is the future for the Supporters Trust movement and the mutually owned model? And that I'll just leave you with a quote, which is from at Exeter City, somebody that David Hahn, who was on the board at Exeter, and he uses, hence my title at the very end there, he believes that it's been a great opportunity to work within a supporter-owned club, but by the same token, they've also missed a number of chances as well. Thank you very much.